Now we welcome Christoph Heitz. Christoph is professor at ZHAW and head of research in smart services and maintenance. Christoph will present a framework to develop fair decision systems in a conceptually sound way, combining the moral and the computational elements of fair prediction-based decision-making in an integrated approach.
Okay, so welcome everybody. So what I'm going to present here is a paper that got accepted for the conference and will be published in the proceedings. So my goal is not to go through everything of this paper, but maybe to point to the most important things. Something that I worked out together with Joachim Baumann. He cannot be here today, so I am the pleasure to present that. Okay, so what do I want to discuss with you? First of all, I want to comment a bit on this unfairness of prediction-based decision systems. I'll give you a formal definition of what fairness is, based on a kind of theory of justice, so something that does not come from data science, but more from political philosophy maybe. And then a most important thing, I'll introduce a step-by-step procedure of how to implement fairness concretely. So prediction-based decision-making, what are we talking about? We are in a framework where someone makes decisions on individuals, a decision that have an impact on individuals. And in that context, we often want we often have some variables that are important for decision, but which we do not know. And let's call this unknown variable y, and we consider just the simplest of all cases. We have two values for this variable y, can be 0 or 1, and we have to make a decision, and this decision can be 0 or 1 as well. And we assume that the theoretical best decision is if y is 1, then I should choose d is 1. And here's an example about the most famous case in the algorithmic fairness debate, which is about a software that has been developed in the United States in the 1990s for helping judges to make a decision. And this decision is whether or not to release an inmate in prison into freedom. And here we have on bail basically, but just do that, yes or no. Here the variable y is this guy will reoffend for the value 1 or will not reoffend if you have the value 0. The decision is keep in prison or release. So of course it's clear if this guy, let's take that one. This is from publication about this case. If this guy will reoffend, of course we keep him in prison. And if he's not going to reoffend, why not releasing him into freedom? Now the point is we don't know this one, right? We don't know whether or not this guy will reoffend. So what we are doing here in data science, we take some data that we have from this person. We put it into we created a prediction model that gives something like the probability whether that this guy will become criminal when released, and then we apply some kind of decision rule. And typically this is a threshold on this estimated probability. So if the probability is high enough, okay, that this guy will reoffend, then we'll keep him or her in prison. Otherwise, we set him free. So this is the formal pipeline here that we have. Okay, now what about fairness in this context? So, decision systems are built to take better decisions. And, well, they supported the judges here, but at the same time, what they also do is they create some impact in the lives of people, of individuals. And the fairness debate is about the question whether different social groups are treated differently in an unjustified way. Do they have different consequences? Is it a case that females are treated systematically worse than males, or black versus white? When we talk about unfairness, we equate it typically with discrimination, and discrimination in this definition that you see here, a systematic disadvantage of a social group. Coming back to this Compass software case, in 2016, a non-profit organization named ProPublica in the United States assessed this system. This system was in place already for 15 years and has been used, in the meantime, has been used for more than 1 million inmates. So there's plenty of data available, and a lot of people have been released based on the score or not. I mean, the judge can overrule that. So we have some empirical data whether or not they have had committed crimes. What they found out that there is a difference in a specific measure, and it was the false positive rate. Here you see two of those inmates. You see also how this software works. The output of the software is a risk score. And the risk score of 3 means 30% probability of reoffending. 10 means 100% probability of reoffending. So we have those two guys. The judge decides now on whether or not to release on bail. So what ProPublica looked at was at this subpopulation of good guys, of guys who have been released and did not reoffend. And what they found out that the probability of having a high score as a good guy was twice as high for blacks as for whites. So if you are a good guy and you happen to be black, you have twice the probability to be assigned a high score and probably not being released at that point. So this is a clear, hard impact on lives of people, which is, of course, discriminatory. So this case sparked a lot of discussion about fairness and was one of the major, let's say, big cases that had been discussed. So in the meantime, a lot of things have been developed. There's quite a lot of research on that. This is the state of the art that we addressed in our work. There are a lot of fairness metrics that have been suggested how to measure fairness. And the point here is they are mutually incompatible. You cannot fulfill one metric and at the same time the other one. So what to do with that? Open question. The other open question is, if I know how to measure fairness, how could I implement that in some decision systems? How to do that technically? Here there are some partial solutions available, but not for a general case. And this is what we addressed here in this paper. The first contribution, and this is the one that I want to focus on, is a kind of a procedure here consisting of 3 steps that start with a moral assessment and end with an implementation of fairness. And we'll go through those steps. The second one is that we extended the current state of the art, discussing about those fairness metrics in a specific way. I don't touch that, and I would like to refer you to the published paper then. So, how do we do that? And we start with the problem of what is fairness here. We have seen that any decision system leads to some consequences. And we look for those consequences in terms of distribution of some benefit or harm. Let's say I'm the judge and you are all inmates, and I make my decisions here. I distribute a benefit, which is freedom, over all of you. And now it might be the case that it happens that only men get this benefit and women not. So this is something that we would say this is problematic. This idea of distribution of benefit among individuals is something that's well known in philosophy. I come from data science, so I'm a techie, but I learned that in this research from a political philosopher. It's well known, and this is the basic philosophical concept that we use. Now, assume this is the population of all inmates being judged. This population these individuals is something that we call decision subjects. So people, it's not the decision maker, which is the judge, but it's people affected by decisions. They happen to be representatives of socially salient groups, for example, men versus women, blacks versus white. And those groups is what we use to speak about unfairness or discrimination. So this is the population sliced into men, male and female individuals. Now, what you can look at if you say, well, here we have a distribution of benefit, we can ask the question, how much benefit, freedom, gets an average individual here compared to an average individual here. And here we are focusing on systematic effects, and mathematically this is an expectation value. So just take out randomly one individual. What is the expectation value of this individual? How much benefit does this one get? And there's let's say, a general principle that has been suggested for these kind of cases a few years ago that says, well, this expectation value should be equal for those two groups. This is obviously something that we can relate to the idea of fair. So now it turns out that sometimes in this population there are some people who have a bit more right to have something because they have a higher need or something, or because they deserve something more. And if this happens, then just comparing left and right is maybe not the right thing, but we slice the population into different subgroups with the same claim to this good that is distributed. And we compare this group with that and this with that, but not this with that. So we must not do that. So this is something that comes out here in the discussion. And this kind of variable that differentiates between the different subgroups with different moral claims is called a justifier. Okay, let me just give an example for this first step, the moral assessment. It consists of two sub-steps. What is benefit? What are the groups to define, and are there any justifiers? Let's say different claims to the distributed good. And we go back to this compass case. The benefit clearly is freedom, being released from prison. Here in that case, someone has chosen to compare Caucasians versus African Americans, so those are the groups to compare. What about justifiers? What ProPublica did, basically, they said, well, you know, there's maybe a different moral claim to freedom. They are the good guys, those here, and they deserve to be set into freedom. And they're the bad guys who just want to rob the next bank. They probably have a lower claim to freedom. So we kind of distinguish between those two, and this is how it comes out. You have the Caucasians here, the African Americans here, and now we slice this population into the good guys and the bad guys. And what we are looking at is what is the among the good guys, do the white good guys get the equal amount of freedom on the average than the black good guys? And this was not the case here. Step 2, how can we now measure fairness? And the literature has, the literature about fairness has suggested something like 80 different measures of fairness, 80 different measures, all mutually incompatible. What you see here is a subset of that, or maybe a kind of a classification of those, but it's still not clear how to measure. And if you have, let's say, you see, we have always parity here as a criterion, so something should be equal. But if one of those criteria is met, the other ones are not met. Now it turns out, and this is a part of the paper, that all the established group fairness metrics are special cases of a specific choice of three things: of what is considered a benefit, of what is considered a morally valid justifier, and which values of those justifiers are seen to be morally important. And just for this compass case, it turns out that the value, let's say the benefit here in this case, is identical to decision, positive decision, big value, negative not. That the justifier is the value of this y, being a good guy versus a bad guy, and especially important morally are the good guys here, not the bad guys. So, and this leads to this specific measure, and this is the true positive rate, or the false positive rate, sorry, and the parity of this rate between blacks and whites has been brought up, or the disparity of that has brought up by ProPublica. But in other cases, we might have other value benefits here. We might have other justifiers. We might have other relevant criteria, and then we end up with another measure. And this basically explains why we have so many measures at the first-hand side. And the second part is it also gives us an idea of what the moral meaning of those measures might be, right? Why to use one and why not to use another one? Because morally, we think this is the correct way of usage in this particular case. And this is one of the main contributions of the paper to really to make this connection, which is, and then I have to tell you that in the literature is a huge confusion about those 80 different fairness metrics and no idea how to apply that. So we do that by taking something from philosophy, from a philosophical, well-established theory, which is called social justice, distributive justice. Okay. Step 3, how do we now implement that? So after we have understood what fairness is with the moral assessment, we have translated this into something that can be measurable, how to make sure that a decision system really creates this kind of fairness. And one way of doing that is that we formulate a constraint optimization model. So we say, well, there's something like a goal of the decision maker. This is judge, and the judge, in our case, has to care for public safety. Right? You should only release people who would not destroy public safety afterwards. At the same time, it should be kind of, he should not keep everybody in prison, so there is this kind of moral right to be set in freedom if nothing would happen. This can be formulated in something like a utility of the decision maker. This should be maximized, but subject to a constraint, to a fairness constraint, and this is now well specified. FEC means fairness of chance, fairness of equality of chances, and this has to be solved. Now the problem is, how do we do that exactly? And another, let's say, something that comes out here when we try to analyze that theoretically is that optimum decision rules, optimum in this sense, fair but maximizing some goal of a decision maker, such rules are always consisting of group-dependent threshold rules. Group dependent. That means, let's say, the probability that has to be given that someone is kept in prison is different for white and black. So this is the way how we can ensure fairness in all variations of fairness. This has been already found out a few years ago for a class, 2 classes of fairness criteria, and just this year we managed to publish a paper for another important class of fairness criteria. So in a sense, this is covered right now. We know that, so this is a kind of how we do that. So there's a solution here, and we can really also construct a way of finding this solution, basically. And this is the way of how you could implement that. We extended it a bit on for situations where you would not like to enforce the full fairness, but maybe it's okay to have enough of fairness, and then it's okay. So, but I refer to the paper for that. Okay, so this is the conclusion that I wanted to show you. Fairness is about benefit being distributed among socially salient group. We have seen that a fair equality of chances is something that is can be used as a guiding principle here. And all classical fairness metrics are special cases. We have discussed this 3-step procedure that really links the moral assessment with the technical implementation at the end and makes sure that we implement something that is consistent with what we morally think is the right thing. This and this is also something that you can find in the paper, is a general approach, and we think that this can be applied to all use cases just by making these choices about these 3 different categories that we went through. In that sense, it is kind of a general approach, and if you want to learn more about it, I would happily refer you to some of those sources, and you'll find that in the paper as well. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much for this very inspiring presentation. If you wouldn't mind to go one slide back, I have a question on one of the slides that you were just presenting.
Here. That one.
One more. Yeah, here. On the second bullet point, you say solution optimum decision rules are always group-dependent threshold rules.
Yeah.
So here, you probably, or what type of group do you mean? Could you give a few examples?
The group, I mean, men and women, blacks and white, for example. The social groups that we choose to select for as reference cases, where I say we want to make sure that there's no discrimination with respect to those groups. This is something that has to be defined. I mean, what groups do we look at? Anti-discrimination laws give us something that is, let's say, a solid foundation, because we as a society have agreed on we don't want to have the discrimination there. But you might, in specific cases, you might have others. And in this you were in this presentation in track 1 as well, right? So they for example, choose age as a criterion, young versus old.
And have you faced discussions around sometimes the discrimination between groups is morally okay? So you say it's okay to differentiate that.
Yes.
Age group is okay.
It is. I mean, this is one part of what is covered with this justifier thing, right? For example, if you go back to that, say, well, sometimes these inequalities are okay, and inequalities, for example, between these people and these, and but it's not okay for that comparison. For example, this might be age groups, right? And then if it happens that, let's say, this is young, this is old, and you have a lot of young men here, focus here, but old women, then if you look at the full population, you might have inequalities, but they might be okay, because all young men are treated equally to the young women, and the old vice versa. It's just a distribution issue. Right? And this happens very frequently, and this is why we use that. But you're totally right, we have to distinguish between justified inequalities and unjustified inequalities. And this is something that we have to think about in the moral assessment.
And there you probably come back to the political fairness and the regulation.
Well, you're not forced to, but this is a kind of, let's say, the base case where everybody starts with. And this is why we always see examples about, let's say, gender bias or racial bias.
Okay. Luca from Swiss Re. Thanks a lot for bringing so much clarity on this topic. I think it's the first time I see it so very clearly explained.
Happy to hear that this is clear. we struggled for 2 years actually to get the essence of all.
Especially this diagram with the split on with the J. That's great. I have a question regarding the result regarding different group-dependent thresholds on the P. Mm-hmm. I would expect that if you have a perfect estimator of a probability of a likelihood of reoffense, you wouldn't need different thresholds. Is that a byproduct of estimation procedure, the fact that your P hat is not P?
No.
It's really...
No. You can have a perfect predictor, and it happens that the compass predictor is nearly perfect. And still you have inequalities. And this is the basic root cause of unfairness, which is often not really recognized, because especially data science community tends to think about the fairness issue, but it's something about the predictor. In the compass case, the predictor was as perfect as you can have it. It's even calibrated between groups, but we still have that. And the root cause of that are different score distributions, or let's say the two populations, blacks and whites, have a different distribution over this probability. And this creates the problem. It's not so easy to see, actually. I'm happy to explain that maybe in the break if you like to. But this is something that you can show very easily. And yesterday we had a 4-hour workshop where it pointed exactly at that point. So it's not a part of the predictor.
Yeah, but wouldn't that then lead to disparate treatment? How do you justify that blacks have a lower threshold than Caucasian?
Because you think it's morally right that the average amount of freedom given to an individual should be equal. You could discuss about that.
Yeah, but it's a trade-off between individual fairness and group fairness then. Because as an individual, if I have the same risk, I want to be treated equally to the other people with the same risk.
This is one of the moral questions that have to be answered, but there's no way around it. You have to take a position there, and in all this fairness debate, something that we find important is to make explicit what my position is, my moral position, which is often not done in the fairness literature. But people can have different decisions, especially in open societies. If it's still where the church saying what is right, things would be easier, then we could end up here with an optimum solution, but in open societies, it's something that has to be.
My concern that the regulators may impose conflicting constraints.
I think this is very probable, and I hope that this research gives some input that helps regulators to deal around, let's say, to avoid such kind of traps.
I think we started a very interesting discussion, but unfortunately we're at the end. Thank you very much, Christoph.
Oh, thank you.